So if you want to swap them out at runtime for whatever reason, you can't do that if you have a direct dependency on it. And almost most importantly, your classes are really difficult to test in isolation. So if you want to replace that dependency with a fake so that you can just test your code in isolation, it's very hard if you're newing up your dependencies directly. So here's an example in this code snippet where we're creating an instance of a repository class. So a repository would be where we store all the blog data. And if we ever wanted that to go against a different type of implementation, we would be out of luck. So one of the techniques that kind of works around those problems is called inversion of control. And in general, what inversion of control means at a very high level is that rather than the caller, let's say your code, which controls the flow of code, also controlling what happens, you delegate that to some other class. So it's kind of like the Hollywood principle. Don't call me, I'll call you. And so there are several different methods of implementing inversion of control, and one of them is dependency injection. So the caller code, or my code, would outline sort of the flow of the code, right? This happens first, this happens next, and this happens after that. But my code is not responsible for, well, when this happens, exactly how is it implemented. And we allow some external component to handle that and to supply us those dependencies. So dependency injection, as I mentioned, is one variant or one way of implementing inversion of control. And the basic idea is rather than me creating my dependencies directly, I'll simply allow some external container to give me my dependencies. And the only thing I will do is I will declare what dependencies I have. So this style of development is simplified by ASP.NET MVC3 because we included this new interface called the iDependency Resolver. And if you're familiar with service location is another way of achieving inversion of control. And what's interesting about dependency resolver is it's actually a service locator, but it's a service locator that the MVC framework itself uses in order to build up components of MVC, in order to instantiate your controller. However, when you're writing code, when you're writing your controller class, you don't need to worry about the service location. You actually write it using a dependency injection style. You just declare a dependency, and when you've set up a dependency resolver, we'll inject that dependency for you. And so what we've done with MVC3 is we've built in a set of hooks. This interface, most of the time you don't even need to worry about this interface unless you're one of the few people who have a custom dependency injection container and you're writing an implementation of this. But for the most part, all the major ones we know about have implementations out there available, such as Ninject, Castle, Structure Map, Spring.NET, and what have you. I'm sure I missed someone's favorite, and now they're going to get
probably the guy in the audience that wrote it. And
yeah,
you probably missed
I'm going to get an angry Twitter. Like, you didn't call out mine.
I was right there in the front row.
So there are three different methods that you need to be aware of in this interface. There's get service. So that's basically get me one instance of this particular interface. Get services, which is get me all instances of this interface. And then there's a release method, but I think that's actually in the MVC specific. We have yet another interface for release methods. So that's not on the core interface. So this table that I'm about to show you shows some of the dependency injection points that we support. So naturally, when you instantiate a controller, you can specify a constructor for your controller. And I think I showed an example of this earlier, or is that?
That was yesterday.
That was yesterday.
Yes.
Yeah, were you there?
These are melding together.
Okay, it's all melding together. But in any case, we'll show an example of this, where you can just specify a constructor argument, and we'll supply the concrete class. Views, we can also inject view engines as well as dependencies into view pages. So, and this is that's actually new in MVC, where MVC2 you really couldn't do anything with views without writing a whole lot of code. Action filters. So this is an interesting one in that for attribute-based action filters, there's not a whole lot we can do, but we can do what's called build-up style dependency injection. Because the CLR, the core runtime, is responsible for building, instantiating attributes. We can't control that. But what we can do is give your dependency injection container, if it supports what's called build-up, allow it to do property setter injection. So before I go too far, I just want to make sure people I understand where you guys are at. How many of you use dependency injection or are very familiar with dependency injection? Can you show hands? Okay. How many of you have never heard the term before? Okay, so at least everyone's heard the term, but not everyone here has used it. So that's great, because in our demo, we'll show some of the cool benefits you get from using it. We call it an advanced feature because, well, for a lot of people it is advanced. It's not something you learn naturally. But we hope to make it into something that people just see as a given, as oh, this is a natural way to write composable applications and maintainable applications. Okay, so as I mentioned, registering and injecting model binders, not something you're going to do very often, but if you wanted to, you can do it. Value providers. So if you're not familiar with value providers, I haven't talked about this today. When we do the model binding, if you remember earlier, I did the whole where I took the jugador and I put it into the argument of the action method. Well, that was model binding, but where the actual values come from is an abstraction called iValueProvider. And so you can have different value providers, and by default, we have ones that look in the request.form, request.files, request.queryString, and so on. So, and you can write your own value providers, and you can use dependency injection to get them all set up. And then validation providers. So validation, by default, we have the data annotations validation provider. But if you want validation to come from some other source, you can use a custom validation provider and have full control of that. And you can do that with dependency injection. A model metadata provider as well. So model metadata is like the extra metadata, like the display attribute, where you can customize the resource labels and all that. So as you can see, there's a lot of cool places where dependency injection allows you to extend and tweak an MVC application to meet all the different various needs that you have that we could not think of ahead of time. And it's kind of one of the core goals of MVC is being really extensible. We know that we can't think of every situation, but you can, and you run into them from day to day with your customers. So you have the ability to extend just about any piece of MVC to work exactly the way that you need it to. So now Drew's going to give a demo of dependency injection, but he needs me to switch this.
And I have to say, this has got to be some kind of sick joke on me, right?
Yeah.
Like, how hard could it be to do a demo in the first place, but I have to do a demo in front of the guy that wrote the product. So if I make any mistakes, I mean,
I'm going to let you know.
You're going to let me know. Good. All right, so let's actually create a new MVC application, first of all. And I know you're probably already disappointed. There's only 13 MVC applications on my machine. You're probably at like 351 or something like that. I'm only at 13. I'll work on that. Practice more. We'll make this an internet application. And what we're going to do is use dependency injection to create a service, and then use that service from our controller. We'll inject it into our controller. Okay. Now, is there a dependency injection framework that I can use that's built into MVC?
So unfortunately, there's no built-in dependency injection framework. It's something that would be nice to have in the framework, but we don't have one. A lot of times people ask me, well, what about MEF, or the Managed Extensibility Framework? And right now, MEF is a really great plugin or extensibility framework, but it wasn't designed for the type of scenarios that traditional dependency injection containers were designed to do. So one of the things I'm trying to work with some of the guys on that team to maybe over time turn it into a dependency injection container as well as what it currently is. But today there is nothing built in.
Okay, that's fine. I'll go and get one from another product that you've worked on called NuGet that you're going to talk a little bit more about later. So I use NuGet.
You picked the wrong one.
Thank you. I realized that as soon as I saw the dialog. And click happy here. I'm going to go online to get this, and let's just try to get it from the real feed first. And
just do a search.
Yep.
Sometimes it takes a second.
Okay. So it looks like it is working. I'll get an inject.
No
Is that